So let's talk about composing paragraphs. You are going to learn how to compose paragraphs by laying out an article. It's a short article. It will fit on one page. You are going to lay it out 3 different ways that will help you learn about communicating hierarchy. But you also need to know some basics about column width and about breaking lines, line breaks, which we refer to as rags. So there are a bunch of considerations when you are laying out text. Again, text is any significant amount of of type, anything more than a paragraph or two. Text as in display text versus text, or what we often refer to as body copy. So for text, there are many layout considerations. One is the column measure, which is the width of the columns of your text. Another is line breaks, which is your hyphenation, how words break when they get to the end of the line. The rag, which is the alignment of the right side, which is very, very closely related to your line breaks or your hyphenation. Spacing, spacing between letters and words, and also the spacing, the vertical spacing of your leading are all very important for text layout. Accuracy, how accurately you reproduce the text. This is a big part of the designer's responsibility. Yes, we work with writers, yes, we work with proofreaders, but it is a big part of our responsibility to find errors, correct them, prevent errors from getting through on our watch. And last but not least is the overall composition of the page, how all the elements on the page relate to one another, how they create a composition of forms. So column measure is the width of your column of text. It can be measured in inches, millimeters, picas. These are all hard, discrete measurements, but it is most accurately measured in characters per line, which is a much more flexible measurement, but gives you a better description of what's going on in the paragraph. I will explain this. The number of characters per line varies with the typeface and the type size. So in this first example, we have the same text. We're using chapter 1 of Alice in Wonderland. These 2 columns use the same text, the same typeface. The only difference is the size. So on the left, we have 21-point type, which means we get a 40-character measure. We can fit 40 characters on the average line at 28 picas wide. So the actual hard measurement, if we laid a ruler across this column, would be that it's 28 picas wide. But if we go in and count the characters, we get 40 characters on the average line on the left-hand side. The right-hand side, it is the same physical measurement. Our column takes up 28 picas of width. Same text, same typeface. We're using smaller point size of type. We're using 14-point type on the right. And that gives us a 65-character measure. We can fit 65 characters in the average line because our type is smaller. So far, pretty easy to understand. Now, in this example, we have 2 columns of the same text. taking up the same physical width. Both are 28 pica wide columns, and both use 18-point type. Now the column on the left uses Dolly, which is a text typeface. It's designed for books specifically. It gets 48 character measure on. We can fit 48 characters in the longest lines. On the right is 18-point Clio condensed. And with this, we get a 54 character measure. We can fit 54 characters in the longest lines. And it's because our type width is narrower. If you think back to Project 1, when we explored width in our skeletal letters, you can see Clio condensed is narrower than Dolly. It's not a huge difference in width, but it makes a difference. It's narrower enough that we fit 54 characters in our measure. In our longest line, we can fit 54 characters in the sample on the right. Now that's only 6 more characters, but you can see it makes a difference. On the left, compare the first paragraph from the left column to the right column. Our first paragraph takes up an entire line less. Our second paragraph is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines deep on the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines deep on the right. So we've saved another line in our right-hand sample. Which means when we get to the third paragraph, it starts 2 lines sooner. All right, so while on the left we are still on the last line of paragraph 2, on the right we have already started the first line of paragraph 3. So you can see we actually, and where do they end? But when the, so on our left-hand sample, our last line is it all seemed quite natural, close parentheses, colon, but when the, and you can see that that text is actually on the 4th line from the bottom on the right. So we have 3 more lines of text that fit in the same exact space because of our narrower typeface, which leads to a more characters per line. Those 6 more characters per line make a big difference. Just over 3 paragraphs. Imagine what a difference it would make over an entire book. So the column measure affects legibility. This is an important one to keep in mind. This sample has 14-point type and a 90-character measure. Our longest lines are fit 90 characters in them. This is too wide. And when our measure is too wide, your eye tends to fall. That's what this magenta arrow signifies. There's a tendency when you're reading text that is too wide for your eye to jump down to the next line below before you've finished. This can actually be a big problem and can really hinder legibility, obviously. On the other hand, if your measure is too narrow, you get a very interrupted, choppy feeling when you're trying to read. And it can create a very unpleasant rag. So the appearance of the right-hand margin of your text can appear very irregular and uneven. It's very displeasing. So this is an example. We have a 25-character measure, which is way too narrow. And you can see just how choppy it is and what a uneven unpleasant rag we have. On the left column, I included a uh, uh, that that magenta line is to show how all over the place our rag is, and it's just not nice. So the sweet spot where text looks best and reads best is when you have between 45 and 75 characters per line for text. This is a rule of thumb. Different designers will tell you different minimums and maximums. I've heard some people say 35 is the minimum. I think that's too narrow personally. I think 45 to 75 characters per line is a very good, comfortable rule of thumb. And here is an example. The same text, Chapter 1 of Alice in Wonderland, our left-hand column, same typeface, same size. So on the left, we have a 45 character measure, which I would say is our functional minimum measure. And it's a narrow column of text, but it's not unpleasantly so. It doesn't look too choppy. Our rag isn't too unpleasant. On the right, again, 14-point dolly, same text. This has a 75 character measure, and I'd say this is about our functional maximum. We don't want any more characters per line than this as a rule of thumb. And you can see it does feel a little wide, but not unpleasantly so. At this point, you're not going to have a lot of problems with your eye jumping between lines. You go much wider than this, and that problem will start happening. So how do you find the measure? It's very simple. You count. Doesn't get much simpler than that. You just count. You choose the longest line, or maybe the second longest line. You count the characters in that line. Just go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Keep going. You must include the spaces as characters. So the word spaces between words count as a character. This is very important. Punctuation, you need to sort of do a little judgment call there. I would only count punctuation if it takes significant width. So as an example, the question mark or the $sign, I'd say yes, I would count those. A period or an apostrophe, I would not count those. All right, so here's an example. Our fourth line down of this column. That is one of our longest lines on the page. There are a few of them, but I just picked that one. That looks like a good one. And I just counted. I pulled it out on the right just so that you can see how I'm counting, but I just counted every single character. I put in blue dots for the word spaces between words. You notice I do count them. Number 7 is our first word space. That counts. Number 12 is our second word space. Number 16 is our third, etc., etc. So with this and counting the comma, I got 44 characters in this line. It's sort of it's not an exact science. I mean, maybe the line below it is a hair longer. I'm not sure, but the point is not to get. We're not scientists with tunneling electron microscopes. We're just trying to get a feel for how many characters our longest line contains. So I counted this as 44, 43 if you don't count that last comma. Honestly, in a real world working situation, I would just round this up or down to the nearest 5. I would actually say this is a 45 character measure. So now let's talk. So that is how you get your character count when you're figuring out the measure of your lines. It's very important to do this, especially when you're first starting out laying out text. After you've been doing it for a couple years regularly, you start to get just more of an instinctive feel for when your column is too, when your measure is too small or too wide. But it is very good practice when you first start doing this to just choose your longest line in a column and count. You don't have to do this for every line. You don't have to do this for every paragraph. You don't even have to do this for every column if the columns are the same physical measurement. You just want to get a feel for, at this size and this column width, what is my character count? What is my character measure? All right, so now let's talk about line breaks. You want to hyphenate words. Hyphenation is when a word is split over 2 lines. A hyphen is inserted to break the word. Modern design software does this for us automatically. There are a lot of tools and a lot of ways in which we can tweak this. You don't have to do it manually anymore, but as with any time the computer is making or software is making a decision for you, you want to be aware of the decisions. You don't want to just trust a computer to make aesthetic decisions. You want to retain control. Even if you're using the software to help make your life easier, which I'm all about, you want to be aware of what's happening and sometimes override the settings to get a better result. All right? So you hyphenate only when needed. All right? Really, you want to avoid hyphens whenever you can. When you do have to hyphenate, you hyphenate between syllables. Okay? Again, the software does this for you, but if you ever have to do it manually, you want to break between syllables. If you're not sure of the syllables, look in a dictionary. It breaks out the syllables for you. You don't want to hyphenate capitalized words. This is a rule in English where we tend to only capitalize the first word of a sentence or proper nouns, like people's names, place names, etc. Other languages, it's a little bit different. German, for example, you do a lot of capitalization. You capitalize a German speaker will capitalize a whole lot more words in text than an English speaker will. So you can't really avoid breaking every capitalized word in German. You do not want to hyphenate across columns. You don't want half a word at the end of one column and the second half at the beginning of the next column. It's too long of a break. It hinders legibility. You don't want to break words 2 lines in a row. So you don't want 2 hyphens in a row at the end of 2 lines. It creates, first of all, it looks ugly. It makes this sort of pointy, barbed look to your text. The second is, it makes it very easy for your eye to jump down from one hyphen to the next and skip a line entirely. And then last but not least, you want to avoid widows. A widow is in the very macabre slang that designers use. A widow is a single word on the last line. So you want to do what you can to avoid a widow. This is Cyrus Highsmith's book, Inside Paragraphs. It's an excellent little book. It is not required reading for this class, but maybe it should be. I highly recommend this book to all of you, and it's a great little book. It's reads like a comic book. Um, you remember this kerning tip from an earlier project? This is from Cyrus's book. And this is Cyrus giving us some actual what not to do examples. So usually we don't hyphenate capitalized words. That's what we shouldn't do. Bad typesetter. It's bad to hyphenate short words. Yes. That's actually a one-syllable word, short. So we shouldn't, you only should break between syllables. If there's only one syllable, you shouldn't break it at all. So that's a bad thing to do. And then our last example of what not to do, narrow columns make hyphenation hard to avoid. The typographer tries to prevent multiple hyphenated lines in a row. You can see we have 3 hyphens right in a row. It looks pointy, it looks like barbed wire, and it creates this ladder that your eye just tends to jump down when you're reading. So you want to avoid this. Now, hyphenation, it is incredibly difficult to have no hyphenation at all. If you strive for having no words break ever, you're often going to end up with some very weird spacing. So basically it's always a compromise between less hyphenation and even spacing. We want to keep the tempo and rhythm of text even. That sometimes does require hyphenation. So this is yet another thing, another part of good typography that is more of an art than a science. All right, so I'm going to give you some examples instead of just talking theory. On the left, I have some poor breaks that I have underlined with magenta, and on the right, I've fixed those. So on the left, our first paragraph, conversation. All right, so that word is broken properly in that it is broken between syllables. However, I have a syllable all alone by itself on the last line. That's a widow. We want to avoid that. And then in the second paragraph, we have a problem when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. This is a problem because White Rabbit is capitalized. And if you know the story of Alice in Wonderland, it is capitalized because White Rabbit is actually a character's name. If this were just any white rabbit, if this were a book about nature and we were saying white rabbits are very uncommon or white rabbits are native to colder climates, we wouldn't be capitalizing White Rabbit, and it wouldn't be an issue. But we have capitalized White Rabbit because that's a character's name in this novel. And you know, so it's like if the name were Barack Obama and we were breaking Obama in half. You know, we don't want to do that. He's the president. Give him a little respect. So, fixing these things. On the right, if you look at, we have better breaks on the right. In the first paragraph, I brought down several lines. You can see the first 4 lines are the same, but once we get to the 5th line, on the left it ends with, but it had no. On the right, I brought down the word no, so no pictures or conversations in it. Then brought down the word and what is the use of a book, comma, brought down the word thought, Alice, without pictures, break, or conversation. All right, so the way that we fixed this widow is to bring down another word and have two whole words in our last line. On the right, we had to get a little trickier. So in this one, the second line for the hot, the word hot came down to the third line, made her feel very sleepy. A line break, and stupid goes to the fourth line. And you can see that this, by adjusting the break on the second line, it has knocked a word or two down on every single line. So now we have white rabbit. White is on one line, rabbit is on the next line. That's fine. We can have the first name and last name on two separate lines, but the name itself isn't broken with a hyphen. Okay? So, this is an improved rag. I keep talking about rag. The rag is the appearance of the uneven side of a text column. In this case, the right side. You want to aim for a smooth, even appearance. All right, so on the left, here's our example again. Here's our improved breaks on the left, but it has a very uneven rag. See, the first paragraph, we sort of have these cliffs and cliff faces. Then the second paragraph, it veers in on the right-hand side, then juts way out. We want to make a smoother line when we can. So on the right, I've improved the rag a little bit, and it's again by starting at the top, inserting what we call soft returns, which are forced line breaks but not paragraph returns, and knocking a word or two down. All right, so very tired jumped to the next line, which knocked bank to the next line, once or to the next line, etc., etc. So in our first paragraph, we have much more of a smooth curve to the paragraph. Our second paragraph just wanted to do something about that huge sort of jut in and cliff on the fourth line. So you can see whether the pleasure of, on the left-hand side, makes this big cliff. So we started at that line, in this case, brought down the word of, so made that much more even with the lines above, which brought the word worth down and affected all the lines below. Now, it's still not perfect, but it's a much smoother appearance. It's a much smoother curve. Another thing you have to look out for, you want to avoid having the same words above each other whenever possible, because that can make your eye skip lines. That is just like the hyphens. It can make your eye jump from one to the next and skip the whole line. So here's an example. On the left, in our improved rag, you can see we have the word it appearing directly over the word it. Okay? And the danger here is that your eye can jump from one to the next and skip a line. So the problem here is that you could go, the book her sister was reading, but, and what is the use of a book? Now, I think we've probably all had this happen to us at some point. You've been reading a book, and you just go, like, what happened? I missed something. And you realize you've skipped a line. And it's not always the reader's fault. It's often the fault of poor typesetting and poor design. So that's why we want to avoid things like this. Now, the fix for this one was fairly simple. I just went to that line where the first it appeared, the last word is in, and I brought down that word. So now the word it and the word in are above each other on the right. Problem solved. The way some students misunderstand this, they think you can never have the same letter above another instance of the same letter. That's not true. What you want to avoid is the same word directly above another instance of the same word. So you can see in our fixed example on the right, we have it above in. They're both two-letter words. They both start with I, but this is not a problem the way it above it was. Okay? So it's just the same two occurrences of the same exact word appearing directly above each other is something you really want to avoid. That doesn't happen very often, but it can be a pain in the neck to fix when it does pop up. So it really won't happen often, but you still want to look out for it. Spacing. Let's talk about spacing in general. And this is again from Cyrus's book. So a word space is the space that is between two words in your text. And this is something that the type designer decides when they are designing the typeface. For characters this wide, I want my space to be so wide. And the right size space separates the words but doesn't separate them too much. So the example on the bottom is a word space that is way too big, and it just breaks up the text and slows it down. Your letter space is the space between two letters. That's the smallest space in your paragraph. Word space is the space between two words. That's the medium space in your paragraph. And a line space, which we know of as leading, is the vertical space between lines. That's your largest space in a paragraph. And this is as it should be. This is the balance of spaces that you need. No matter how large or small your text is, you want letter space to be smallest, word space to be in the middle, and your line space to be the largest space. Now, you have some control over the spacing if you do an overall kerning change. We refer to that as tracking. I find it's generally best not to mess with the tracking too much. But if you do, this is what happens. So let's say you go in and make your tracking very tight. You make an overall negative kerning move to the entire piece of text. It means you have a very tight spacing and it gives you a very fast tempo. You tend to read very quickly. If you go in and make an overall tracking move, you will get a very loose spacing, which tends to have a slower tempo. This can really slow the reader down. So, if you have a tight letter space and a loose word space, which is probably a poor idea, you get a very, very choppy tempo. You get big, big gaps in your text, and it feels very choppy. If your letter space, if you have a loose letter space and a tight word space, that creates a very wobbly tempo, and it means that it's very hard to tell the difference between words. So you don't want to mess with this proportion of spaces very much. And this is just an example. If you are going to adjust tracking, this is how it might be helpful. If you have a very wide measure and you are encouraging people to read more slowly, that might be an okay time to increase the tracking slightly. If you have a very narrow column, you want to encourage people to read it quickly, say in the case of captions, image captions, or sidebar information, you might tighten the tracking slightly. Now again, I'd say in general, most of the time it's best to just leave the tracking alone and use all the other tools at your command as a designer. But if you adjust tracking, keep this in mind. Last, but certainly not least, is accuracy. It is the designer's responsibility to ensure that text is reproduced accurately. You want to look out for typos in the text, and you want to prevent making any typos. You want to catch any typos that may already exist, and you definitely don't want to introduce any new typos. Now, we are usually working with two other people. We are usually working with someone who has written the text and gives us a text file. And we are usually working with a proofreader who will proofread and look for mistakes. A lazy designer would think, well, I don't have to worry about mistakes then. The writer shouldn't have made any mistakes, and the proofreader should catch them all. So that's not my job. Well, nobody can catch all mistakes all the time. And as one of the links in this chain, it is our responsibility to look out for them and try to catch them. Because our writer cannot catch every mistake that he or she makes, and our proofreader cannot catch every single mistake that may exist. So we are another pair of eyes there. We want to look out for these things. Proofread your work. I cannot emphasize it enough. This is a set of very common proofreading marks. Different people use different ones, but this is fairly common set. This is from your book. Use them. So, let's go. Let's do our project. I will record another video with a demo of how to actually do the project, and that will be next.